So, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Dreamy CEO podcast. Today, I have Megan here. She is a wellness coach and strategic advisor working with women, leaders, and companies to implement strategic wellness plan practices into their existing routines to enable more sustainability, energy, creativity, and productivity to prevent burnout. So, hello, how are you today?
Hi, Vicky. Thanks for having me. I'm well. It's Friday. Can't complain.
I know, we love it. So I'd love to hear more about you and what you do and your story. I really loved connecting with you through Instagram, so I'd love for you to share more about that, about you on the podcast today.
Yeah, well, I'll just highlight some of the sort of catalysts that really were transformational points for me and ultimately inspired me to support specifically women, but I do also work with men. Just because the more I learned and the more I saw these shifts and changes in my own life and just how dramatically it shifts your perspective of who you are and what you're capable of and your sustainability and all these things. So for me, like I used to sort of joke that when I first started getting into the wellness industry, it was through yoga. I did my
Mm.
level 1, 2 Ashtanga training in Toronto back in, I don't know, 2007, I think, like a while ago.
Wow.
And, so yoga was my quote unquote gateway drug to the wellness industry. Before that, I really wasn't doing, in my 20s, I was not doing anything really healthy. I would ski the odd weekend, let's say, and maybe I would go to the gym once in a while, but I really wasn't conscious about how much different my life could be if I was taking care of myself, meaning like caring a lot about, I think like a lot of women, I cared about what I ate to look a certain way, but
Mm-hmm.
not from any other perspective. And it wasn't until, so a little bit of yoga shifted my perspective on a lot of things, which I won't get into the specifics. But then I would say it wasn't again until, which was probably like 5, 6 years later when I got pregnant, which I think is another catalyst for a lot of women. They get
Mm-hmm.
hyper vigilant of what they're putting in their bodies when they're pregnant. Not so much for themselves, but for their ability to produce the healthiest baby possible, right? And so
Yeah.
I got really interested and went down a lot of rabbit holes and took dramatically much better care of myself for in so many ways through pregnancy. And at that time, so I was pregnant and then I breastfed and then I was pregnant and then I breastfed. So it was like a 4-year window where it shifted my relationship with a lot of things that were kind of a given for, my life up until that point.
Wow.
And at that, now being a mom of two young boys and just like really, even though I have all of these tools, supposedly, yoga and eating healthy and a lot of other holistic things that I was doing, I was sort of meditating back then and all this. I still like I just wasn't getting back to feeling like myself. And so then I started diving deeper. That's where I became certified as a health coach
Mm-hmm.
and, really looking like across, there's just so many things that we can get into, but
Yeah.
looking at everything from a more holistic perspective and then ultimately with myself and then working with other women, seeing like that the mindset piece is so key when you want to make sustainable long-term changes. Like you almost need to accept a little bit of an identity shift if
Mm-hmm.
because some of these things just run so deep, these
Yeah.
these habits that aren't serving us.
Wow, that's incredible. I loved how you leaned into like a more holistic approach because a lot of times when we think of being healthy or, like the wellness industry, at least like when we first dive into that, we really think of let's see how many times we can go to the gym this week, how healthy we can eat and like not getting fast food, so many different things that like restrict ourselves, but we don't think about like mentally like how we're feeling and like being really in tune with our body and our mind. And like you said, it's the holistic approach of everything falling together to be your best version of yourself. And so when it comes to, growing and scaling our businesses, like as, female founders or as entrepreneurs in general, it almost becomes way too easy for us to, put aside our well-being while we're working hard towards our goals. And it seems like time and time after time again, incredibly counterproductive to do that because we get so easily burnt out, and especially in the online space almost every single one of us has struggled with burnout in growing and scaling our businesses. And is that something that you commonly see, like navigating conversations with your clients, becoming really easily burnt out?
Yeah, well, as you're talking, I'm thinking like so many women come to me and they start saying, well, I'm doing that, like I'm taking 20 supplements. And like you said, I'm going to the gym 5 days a week. And they like by the time they've told me all the things they're doing for their quote unquote wellness, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
exhausted just listening. And I'm like, okay, wait, well, back up. Like
Yeah.
you're 30 and you're taking 20 supplements, like something's off here. And and there's so many pieces that we don't understand, like sticking with the supplement example is if it's taxing for your system to be processing something that's highly processed like that, you know
Mm-hmm.
just eat
Yeah.
an apple. Or you know
Yeah.
I'm never going to say like stop exercising, but at what point are you stressing yourself out to get to the gym?
Mm-hmm.
Or like the day that you're exhausted and in bed sick, you have this like ongoing layer of guilt because you didn't get to the gym. Well, that's so counterproductive. It's like if no amount of kale is going to solve that you hate your thighs or you
Yeah.
fundamentally dislike an aspect of yourself. So there's so many threads that we can pull on, but I think for women entrepreneurs in particular and the burnout, it's understanding like dial it back.
Yeah.
Guarantee you can be doing less and have a lot less stress about what you are and are not doing. It's essentially taking back some agency. And it helps to work with an expert, which is like, yeah, that makes sense for you at this point in your life. But you can get this similar benefit. Let's take meditating, for example, which by the
Mm-hmm.
way, there is no one size fits all wellness. Meditating isn't for everybody. There's 100 mindful practices one could consider. But let's say you've gone through a course on transcendental meditation, which I have, and you're taught that minimum 20 minutes a day in this set way, in ideally right when you get up, all these rules.
Mm-hmm.
And then ideally you have to add 20 minutes later on. And again, like I'm already stressing people out. Like
Yeah.
that's just not going to fit in my life.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, look, whatever you can do is better than nothing.
Mm. I love that. I would say when it comes to wellness, from what I'm hearing, is that wellness shouldn't be sacrificing one aspect of your wellness over the other, right? What I'm hearing is like
Exactly.
you don't need all of these rules because it's almost stressing you out. It's almost like making you, I guess, overly wellness in one sector. And on the other side, on the flip side, you're stressing yourself out and you're almost, picking one over the other and versus a more holistic approach where it's a lot more balanced and you're leaning into what you need for your body and yourself. And so I think especially right now, especially being so connected in the online space, like on TikTok, on Instagram, we're seeing left and right of different ways that we can elevate our wellness. And almost we create so many rules for ourselves. Like in the morning, I'll drink a green juice. I will do a ginger shot. I will take all these supplements. I will do X, Y, and Z. And it's almost like, do you really need that? Right. So I'm really curious
And
to
how
see.
can you be sure like how it's really affecting you if you've got so many layers and you start these things all at the same time,
Exactly.
it might be helping you, but do you really know?
That is really interesting. And something that I just thought of when you said that of like you're piling all this on and all you're practicing all these different wellness routines is like if you're testing for allergies, right? So for an example, you're testing for intolerances or allergies, is like you're gonna take something for a while to see if that's the reason why you're your body is rejecting it, right? And so would you say that would apply also to wellness? Like if you feel like, oh, I need to lean more into mindfulness, or I need to lean more into like meditation and all these different practices, trying out one thing at a time versus trying out multiple and seeing what sticks, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, so I really focus on integrated wellness. I help women
Mhm.
make it seem like a way of life and not a check mark on their to-do list. And in
Yeah.
doing that, it does require a little bit of patience, which is
Mm-hmm.
not sort of the norm. You know, we live in a society, we want quick fixes. We want to take a pill that we feel different tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And it in the holistic space, you really need to give it some time. And not complicated. So if you're doing a new diet and starting a new exercise routine and taking 10 new supplements and, or
Yeah.
like you say, you know, a new meditative practice, what's actually helping? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
what is it helping? Like maybe one's helping you sleep better, but
Yeah.
maybe one's having the opposite effect, right? And so in order to really tease out the effects, it's a little bit calmer, more patient, trial and error, which, a lot of people are not loving that it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're going to try something for 2 weeks and we're just going to try these little tiny things,
Yeah.
these things that you can tease out what's actually working and does it work with your life? Similar to having systems in your business.
Mm.
If it's just taking more time to maintain that system and it's not really supporting you in any way, like why are you doing it? Maybe it's not meant for your business, similar to whatever wellness practice.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that. So, for those who are very impatient, and I think I could be one of those people when it comes to trial and error, especially in like focusing on your wellness and such, what would you recommend to like as a reminder when we start feeling impatient or when we are almost like I want to see it now, and what would you recommend for us to remind ourselves in those moments of tests, you could say, like those tests that you feel like, um,
Yeah, well, similar in the entrepreneurial space,
yeah.
like there's a lot of trust involved
Hmm.
and holding the vision, right? Like once in a while you have, overnight success, but that's not actually the norm.
Hmm.
And so it's similar in the wellness space in that you need to, I mean, I think there's a couple things here. One thing that helps and so that you feel like you're doing something or, keeping it front of mind, I really welcome people to journal when they're making
Okay.
this change so that you actually see, because we have very convenient memories, let's say about what we actually ate, how much water we drank,
Yeah.
you know, all these things. Of course, we have increasing amounts of tech to support us with these things, but um, I don't know if you've seen like the new iPhone, whatever the like new operating system has a journal app that's really cool.
Oh, okay.
It like takes a group of your pictures and, it also has like a lot of, one might think creepy information, like a little map of where you walked that day, but whatever.
Okay.
You can,
Wow.
you can like cluster these little things together and keep a journal. But I think journaling is a really powerful tool to keep you holding the vision,
Mhm.
clarity on why am I doing this new thing, be it a detox, be it a meditative practice, practicing gratitude, whatever it is that you're trying to bring in. It's the consistency and the sort of staying on top of what you are noticing
Mhm.
and practicing being a little bit more observant, because again we get kind of get trapped in this, like we think this, let's say caffeine, like we can't live without caffeine or 6 coffees in the morning or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I invite the women I work with to be curious scientists about their own experience
Okay.
and uh really analyze, like, what are the stories that I'm telling myself about this
Mm.
thing that I'm trying to change, and getting really self-aware. It's all about self-discovery and understanding yourself better, and usually involves a little bit of humility and getting real with yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the patience piece, I think maybe it's not the best answer, but you kind of distract yourself with all those other things, being the curious scientist, to
Mhm.
make time go faster.
I love the way that you put that of like being a curious scientist. And what are like being really in tune with what the stories we tell, like about ourselves. When you said that, I instantly thought of like me saying, I've always got a coffee in my hand, or, just like this narrative, whereas like, yeah, but coffee's not great for anxiety, you know what I mean? So it's really like the stories that we tell ourselves, or being able to break the patterns that we have on a daily basis. And so I love how you were saying, why are you doing this? And why did you decide to stop drinking coffee? Or why did you lean into this specific wellness practice within your life? And that is really interesting. I love the way that you put that. Um, when we, lean into these stories about, you know, our wellness, or I'm not athletic, or I'm just not a gym girl, I just can't live without my 6 coffees a day. What would you recommend for those who are telling themselves these narratives to break that pattern? Like, how would you suggest restructuring their thought patterns or their um, daily routines to make a change that they truly want to see?
Yeah. Well, let's stick with the coffee example. Like where
Mhm.
this really was powerful for me was when I quit drinking. So I had to change my narrative about wine culture that I was immersed
Yeah.
in. But I think coffee is an amazing example, particularly in the online space, where there's almost, or there is like an aesthetic
Yeah.
around coffee culture, being in a cafe, working with your laptop, like all of that.
Hmm.
So I think it's about one, immersing yourself in a different aesthetic just for a while. It's
Oh,
like I'm gonna try, and it's not like restricting coffee because that'll never work. You're
hmm.
like alter ego teenager will just, sabotage that whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm shifting into a matcha aesthetic, like
Oh,
and inform yourself, like
yeah.
do a comparison, or like what are all the benefits of coffee. There are some benefits of coffee, it is an antioxidant to some degree, but at what point is it costing your adrenals versus matcha, which helps you control your appetite? It is like anti
Yeah.
cancer. It like there's like way longer list. And so immerse yourself in the Pinterest, Instagram space of beautiful matcha-ness
Yeah.
and kind of, sell yourself on it, fall in love with the benefits and fall in love with the new look, if you will, and then also be the curious scientist and really drill down on how do you feel differently?
Wow.
How is your mood different? How is your digestion different? Are you sleeping better? Like all of these things, and just kind of build up the case for yourself. Because if you go from it from a side of like demonizing, that's
Yeah.
the right word,
Mhm.
that is a word, then it's not going to be sustainable. You're going to
Mhm.
fall back into the old, the hardcore coffee is for entrepreneurs
Yeah.
argument. Or
I love how you said like shift your aesthetic, right? And like try it out. And again, like from what I'm hearing is that it doesn't need to be forever in the sense. Like from what I'm hearing, you talk about is that just experiment and seeing what sticks, seeing what changes your patterns in your life, and that's just gonna automatically change your routine and your lifestyle. Something that is very uncommon in the wellness space is like cold turkey, almost like just quit your coffee. It's going to be hard, but just do it. And I love the way that you have explained it in a way of like why are you doing this, and think of it of like different alternatives that will actually make it work out for you in the end, and versus like almost setting yourself up for failure, because like you said, like your body's just gonna, like your mind is just gonna reject that being the case because of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's really incredible. And I think in the wellness space there's so many different sectors, right? Like there's fitness, there's like hormonal, like so many different sectors. And so what would you say are the main branches of wellness that one could focus on? Because I'm sure that those who are listening and I myself, sometimes it can be daunting of all the things that we could do and dabble on or experiment. Like, where do we even start the paralysis? So, I'd love for you to share basically, some of the different sectors that we could start leaning into in a more generalized aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely part of the holistic nature of wellness, especially from my perspective, is that it's all interrelated. So I have a
Mm.
6 pillars of optimal wellness system, and I hold it on a graphic where everything's really leaning into each other. I mean, there's overlap at least on several, if not all. Let's just take, so the first pillar is optimizing your sleep,
Okay.
which, is maybe not a cool thing to do in your 20s and 30s, but you get to the end of your 30s and you really seem to appreciate more like how much more beautiful you look in the morning when you've had a good night's sleep versus when you haven't, right? Like if you, even if
Yeah.
you take it from that perspective. But so start with sleep, and that moves into so many things. And it's overlapped in my mind with 4 types of wellness. So you can focus on
Mm.
optimizing your physical wellness, your emotional wellness, your mental wellness, or your spiritual wellness. And again, there's like it's a circle,
Okay.
they all overlap. So let's take sleep. That's always the first thing I start with clients. How are you sleeping? What's the quality? Are you honoring some sort of natural cycle and sleep cycle, which again is not, most of us, at least I did all through my 20s and 30s, had one schedule Monday to Friday and a completely different sleep schedule on the weekend,
Mm-hmm.
which no big deal in your 20s, but as time goes on, and we just aren't taught like how detrimental that is to our energy,
Mm-hmm.
our really our mental clarity, our ability to focus, learn, memory, all these things.
Wow.
Um, into your day-to-day experience is so much better if you get a good night's sleep.
Mm.
Now, of course, we have all these things that we fun. Oh, I'll just drink more coffee, or I'll like, pound out a workout and get natural energy that way. And it's like, yeah, okay, but that's not sustainable. Like at some point
Yeah,
that's going to catch up with you, and arguably just because you can do something doesn't mean it's ideal for your wellness, right? So I think you can focus on sleep, which leads to so many other conversations like, okay, we want to optimize sleep, we have to know how much alcohol are you drinking right before bed, how much coffee are you
mm,
drinking up until what hour, what are you eating, like is your digestion happening while you're sleeping, getting into the ideal number of hours that you're doing minimum intermittent fasting, all these things. So there's like
wow.
kind of trends that I feel like get highlighted in the wellness space, but it always comes back. And this is sort of my zone of genius where it's like, okay, all of these things are interacting together. It's
Mm.
like the gears are moving and one thing is affecting the other. So let's start playing with, usually someone comes to me, pretty much never for to improve their sleep, but that's where I kind of bring them back to, and then they quickly
Yeah.
see how everything's related. Most women want to talk about, changing their diet in some way, or they want to start a mindful practice, or yeah, find, I think it all so much comes down to giving yourself permission
Mm-hmm.
and taking back your personal agency to make a wellness lifestyle or blueprint, that I like to call it, that works for you. Not everyone is meant to go to the gym, but I personally love all sorts of apps and wellness routines that, you're definitely building muscle,
Yeah.
but in a more feminine aesthetic, like it is important that you feel that it resonates, like it's not going to work if you feel like you're not being yourself when you're trying to bring this in. So
I love that.
I feel like I went on a bit of a tangent there, but it kind of
No,
answers your question.
I love that, and I can totally see where journaling comes in now in terms of tracking everything, especially if they overlap and tracking your sleep, tracking what you're eating, and your fitness and such. So that is really really incredible. Yeah, something that I noticed like this past year, so I started like my fitness journey a little over a year ago now because I would tell myself, I'm not athletic, I'm not fit, like all of these things, but changing that narrative and stepping outside of that box that you've put yourself in And I found myself really leaning into weight training, right? Of like the really heavy weights, squats, all of that stuff, because that's what I was seeing in the online space of different techniques and stuff. And then I started leaning into yoga and more flexibility things, and I find that I loved that so much more for my body and how I felt. And so this year really leaning into that, and it's really crazy because over a year ago, if you were to ask me like, oh, are you like doing yoga, are you doing flexibility, I'd be like, no, like I'm trying to build that muscle, right? I'm trying to like lift as much weight as I can. And, I wouldn't believe that I'd be doing yoga today. And so it's really interesting, like really just changing your narrative, trying out different things, and almost keeping track of yourself and being really in tune with how you feel, your practices, your habits. And I really loved what you said about really like starting today, because 10 years down the line and so on, and um, your body is going to really change naturally. And so setting yourself up for those habits, planting that seed to make it a lot easier for you down the line is incredible. So that really put things into perspective, especially being in my early 20s, of like, okay, if I start sleeping well now and like adapting these habits, my life is going to look and feel so much easier as time goes on, because these habits are second nature to me now, right?
Yeah, oh, so
Yeah.
many things I want to say. I mean, one quick thing is just with the sleep and in your 20s, like if
Mhm.
someone had told me in my 20s that when you don't sleep well, you tend to eat like 300 to 600 more calories the next day because your body's looking for energy, right? Like you didn't get it
Oh,
while you rested. So, and you also are then in like this sort of like craving quick energy, which is like the sugar.
yes.
So you make different choices. Like there's so many things that go into bettering your sleep. But I just want to touch on what you said from a slightly different way, which is for me, it's been so helpful to help to show women the cycles, like we are on a monthly cycle, but we're also on
Mhm.
annual cycles and we're in phases of our lives, and you need this toolbox and you need to give yourself permission that maybe these 3 months weightlifting speaks to me, and then
Mhm.
it doesn't, and it doesn't say anything about you that now it doesn't. Like maybe you'll go back to it someday, or maybe it was just that season.
Yeah.
And yoga, I mean, I'm a huge fan of yoga, obviously, but also sometimes I do it daily, sometimes I do it once every 10 days, but I do it for, like
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be in some sort of cookie cutter formula in order to be serving you.
Wow. Okay, that is a really interesting perspective, and I can totally see that as well. Like when you just shared that, you could see like the gears turning in my head. But that's really interesting. I loved our conversation today, and I've gathered so much from it, and I'm sure those who are tuning in are just like ready to step into their, wellness path and or really refine it. So, thank you so much for our conversation today. I'd love for you to share with those who are tuning in, where they can find you and different ways that they can work with you if they're interested.
Yeah. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and my website. It's all Megan Swan Wellness. And yeah, there's several ways I work one-on-one with women, in particular female founders and women that are interested in becoming leaders, whatever that means to them in their industry or in their expertise. And yeah, we usually start out with what I call a wellness intensive. And it's just kind of a deep dive, an audit, if you will. And you come out of it with a 12-month blueprint that you can then, go on your way and implement little by little on your own, or we can discuss how I can support you in doing that. There's several ways. I also have a community called Wellness is a Way of Life and a podcast by the same name.
Wow.
And yeah, just reach out. I absolutely love helping people get, quick wins and helping them just what is the 1 to 3 things that you can focus on in the next 3 months that you're going to find massive impact on your well-being and your day to day.
Amazing. I will definitely tag everything and your socials and website in the show notes. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and I loved our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Vicky.